My name is Sara Smith-Silverman. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a professor of history at American River College, and today's date is October 12th, 2023. So let's start off by establishing the basics. What's your full name? What are your pronouns? And what's your date of birth?
My name is Hevani Dofak-Haihau. Let me see. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I was born on July 21st, 2000.
And so that makes you 23?
Yes.
Okay. Tell me a little about yourself. What are your interests and hobbies? What do you like to do?
What I like to do is arts and crafts, painting, sketching, reading and writing. And I think one of my biggest hobbies, I would have to say, is rugby refereeing.
Rugby?
Yeah.
Did you play rugby when you were growing up?
Yeah. Rugby goes a long way, I think, in our family, because my mom and dad, both sides of their family, have a huge lineage of rugby on both sides. So rugby's been involved in our family for like generations, but I got involved in rugby quite late, I think in my junior year. We played for, I think, a local girls rugby team called the Lamb Park Harlequins. That was my first experience, I think, playing for like a rugby sport or something like that, or sport in general. And it was really fun because I think for a long time my mom said like rugby was for the boys or something like that. And so I was kind of like discouraged in a way. And not only that I was also very insecure of my body for like so many years. In a way, like I considered myself like a very fragile person. And the thought of like physically harming someone was like something I could never imagine ever doing in a sport such as rugby. But then when I finally got into rugby, I think it was something that was very powerful for me in a way, because I think as I continued, I grew like confidence in like my own body and physical strength. Well, the thing that I think I loved most about rugby was like tackling, because it was the best way to test my physical strength. But for some reason, others would always like assume like or misinterpret that as me wanting to hurt others, which was far from anything I wanted to do. It was just mostly like something for me to just test my strength, honestly. And then I think since then I just fell in love with rugby, and I wanted to like expand my like love more by becoming a referee to gain more knowledge and experience as a rugby player. And things didn't go, I think, as I thought I would from there.
What do you mean? Can you elaborate?
Well, because I think in a way, I loved like playing rugby, and I finally became a referee after I received so many injuries as a rugby player, because I dislocated my shoulder 15 times. But I think my dad's encouragement was that pain was only in the mind. So eventually, like I had to make a stop and say that I'm going to take a break from playing to just recover from my own injuries. So getting into refereeing was still the same, like to gain more knowledge and experience as a rugby player, but also stay active while I was recovering from my injuries. But my peers, I think, that I got involved with saw so much potential in me and gave me like guidance, I think, to sign up with the scholarship known as the David Williamson Scholarship that was recently, I think, established in 2017. I was really afraid of signing up for it because I didn't really see much of a future for me as a referee besides like being a rugby player. So I was really avoidant of signing up with it, but one of my referee coaches, David Hostley, continuously pushed me to sign up with the scholarship anyway, and then I ended up receiving, I think, the scholarship along with, I think, someone else named like Will Nilsson. We both received the David Williamson Scholarship, I think, in 2020, I think in May or June of that year. But we couldn't really do anything with the scholarship because it was the pandemic and everything was shut down. We weren't allowed to travel anywhere. And more background on the David Williamson Scholarship. It's for like referees between the ages of 18 and 23 to fly to, I think, Alberta, Canada for like, I think 4 to 6 weeks for the summer, refereeing sevens or so to get experience in that regard. I was really afraid because I'd never been away from my family. So it was just the thought of that was like very scary for me. So I was just like very avoidant of that. And how that expanded is quite wild thinking about that, because I think if I didn't continue, I think with this sort of journey becoming a referee, I don't think I would have been the same person I am today than I was like 5 or 4 years ago.
How has it changed you, do you think?
I think a lot. Looking back to it, because I was homeschooled my whole life. And I think the person I was growing up and then how that evolved, and especially the values of being a referee really like changed my life in a way, because I was homeschooled my whole life, and I think that comes from both my parents. When they were younger, they weren't raised by their biological parents. They were sent off to a relative or so. My dad, he was born and raised. Kolomatua on Tonga Tapu was born in the main islands in Tonga. And his parents sent him away to live with his auntie Leah. He has, 2 sisters. He has 5 or 6 other siblings, and all the boys were sent away to live with other relatives, and his parents only like kept the 2 sisters. So he majorly like lived with his auntie until he was 9 or 8 or so, and then his parents like moved to, I think, the US, I think in the early 80s or so, when he was 9. But he always considered his auntie like his first mother. And with my mom's parents, she was like sent off to live with her Puerto Rican grandma in St. Croix for the majority of her life, and would only visit like her parents during the summer of her life until she was like in college, sent off to college. So my parents would always tell us that they never had a chance to grow up with their parents, so they decided to keep us homeschooled or make us live a sheltered life because they always wanted to keep us close together with them. Just for me, like just for that bond with my parents, I'm like so close to my parents in that way. We were upbringing. But in a way, I felt isolated in a way because through our culture and religion, I feel there was just like so much that I don't know how to explain. It's like growing up, I don't know, like I just felt like voiceless in a way, like growing up, because like in our culture, there's so much that involves like discipline and obedience to your elders, and so I feel like it was hard for me to like fully express myself without being seen as disrespectful and shameful to my own family from the perspective of a cultural and religious sort of aspect to that. Because I felt there was like so much like, especially like when I was like very young, I felt I always had to conform to all the expectations and responsibilities like my family placed upon me, even at the cost of like my own happiness, like just to receive their love. I didn't feel that I had my own voice. I felt like my voice was constantly held in those around me, as well as how they saw me like for so many years. And in a way, I feel that growing up, it mostly felt like I lived for my parents and not for myself, like for so many years. So it was hard to even like see myself. I think when I went on to like do things, I think for myself in a way, but though it was still tied to my family, such as like refereeing. I think it was easy for me to get into refereeing because it was still tied to something that was connected to them, like rugby. It's such a huge part of our family and everything. And then going into refereeing, it was still a part of it. But then one of the aspects I think that was hard for me to adjust to was like being a referee, you have to have a lot of self-respect for yourself and ownership, I think, in how you control the game, because you're the sole judge of the person on the field. Managing 30 like people, like when you're doing 15s or like 7s, it's like 30 or 14. And it was like hard for me to adjust that because I really didn't see myself like for me in a way. Because I think when I got into like playing rugby, it was more like building that confidence and physical strength on the outside or so. But I feel like when I became a referee, it really exposed like lots of like my insecurities about myself and how I allowed people to treat me and disrespect me for their own like benefits in a way. So I feel like it was very hard for me to adjust to. I did feel like I wanted to quit refereeing like after like the first few months I started refereeing, because I started to realize like refereeing was more than like rugby. There was like responsibilities, self-respect, and all these other values that you had to compete with, like being a referee. And that was like hard for me to adjust to, because I wanted to stay who I was. I wanted to live in my own corner. I didn't want to come out to the light and expose those insecurities. But I think when the pandemic happened, it really like gave me that time and self-reflection to really, I think, go more in depth of how I was feeling. Because I think I had a strong relationship, I think, with my older sister in a way. We were really, really close. But I think it was only then that I started to realize how like disrespectful she was to my own boundaries and everything like that, and the way she treated me. And dismiss like any like aspect that I felt that was true to me was always like dismissed or like just dismissed in lots of those regards, like for myself. So I always felt like put down by her in the ways that she experienced her own life. So I always felt like I was living in my own shadow. But I think around that time, she was living on her own, and she was going through her own problems, and she cut contact with me, I think, for a very long time. And I think really gave me that space of reflection to really like focus on myself and really like appreciate the things that I really loved and had value and interest for. And I think when the pandemic started to open up more, I think in 2021 I got back into refereeing, because the incident before, I think the pandemic happened, I think in March or something. I think I experienced the worst, I think, disrespect as a referee ever. My last game, it was like a boys varsity match it was my first boys varsity match that I refereed. It was a 15s match, but I felt the most disrespect from that because they were constantly cussing at me, saying all of these things, and I didn't do anything to stop that. I allowed that disrespect, allowed that hatred and yelling, because in a way, like, I felt that was a reflection of how I felt inside. In a way, it's like I allowed them to disrespect me that way because I really felt that way inside, like that low. And I allowed, like, in a way, my family to treat me that way for so many years because I felt like it's what I had to accept, because I didn't want to be seen as a problem to them. So I allowed lots of those. In a way, it was just like I was very susceptible to so much harm and violence because I didn't want to be seen as a problem, like, to them. And that only translated to my relationships with others as I got older. And having that sort of, like, deep reflection during the quarantine and having my own space, I really saw, like, those things for what it was. And I really wanted to, like, do something and improve on sort of how I managed, I think, those situations. So I would go out refereeing, I think, every weekend when the pandemic started to open up again. I would go out. I did improve, and just a few games that I was offered, I would referee, like, youth games across, I think, Northern California that was available to me and everything like that. It was tiring at times, but it was just like, for me, I wanted to get enough experience into handling those situations as well as developing, like, more self-respect for myself in that way.
Okay, is there anything else you want to say about what you were just talking about?
I'm trying to figure out how much stuff I should go into it, because I think for me, there's, like, a long journey. I feel like, in a way, I found acceptance, I think, for my own identity, along with, I think, this journey as becoming a referee in a way.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I would referee, like, every weekend, and eventually coming back. And then I think the following month I was invited to this tournament, I think, called Rugby Town Sevens. I didn't really know much about it, but the invitation was to referee AR, which means assistant referee at a professional, like, tournament. So that's what I heard about it, but I didn't really know much about it. And I think that was the first time I had to travel somewhere without my family with me. My parents asked me if they wanted me to come with them or so, but I said that's all right, because I knew I had to take this step, like, alone traveling. So it was the first time I ever traveled without my family. I was, like, very shy, entering this, like, new space with all these, like, other professional referees that I didn't even know. I think the only person that a well-known name that I knew was Kat Roche at the time, but besides that, I didn't really know anyone at the tournament. There was, like, my other partner for the scholarship would be there too, like, William Nelson. So for me, it was like, I was really, like, scared. I didn't really, like, talk much, but I think the one thing that, like, was so meaningful to me, because even though they didn't know me, I felt they were so welcoming and accepting of me into the group, because I was, like, really scared. I didn't really say anything because I'm so introverted, but in a way, it is just, like, appreciated my own work and such, and involved me into the group, because even though I think I was still a bit inexperienced as a referee at that time, it was just more, like, for me, running the lines or so. But there was, like, a point, I think, on the first day, I think Kat Roche, I was sitting, like, by myself with my bell watching the other referees, and she came to me and told me that she's never seen anyone, like, run as hard as I did, even when it wasn't necessary to get in position in goal or as an AR. And she just wanted to congratulate me on that. That,
oh,
honestly,
nice.
honestly, like, I really wanted to cry because in those spaces, especially when I was like in my own referee society, I was constantly told by like my other like referee coaches who were, I think, let me see, old white men in a way. This is majorly like my referee coaches, but they would mainly just focus on my fitness. It's like I had to run harder than the men in a way. And that always made me like self-conscious about my body and my own fitness. And I never thought I was good enough. But then to have like a professional female referee tell that to me, it just meant like so much to my heart. I was like, okay, I don't feel alone. And from then on, it was just like the tournament continued with that same attitude and environment of welcoming and accepting. And I think what I found was like, I think one of the most interesting when we had our discussions after refereeing, because we're in a team of 5. We have the center referee, ARs, and angle judges at the goal lines. We would come back to, I think, the locker room and then have a debrief with the coaches. And in those moments, we were asked to be completely honest about how we were feeling. It's just like having that level of honesty was a huge part of, I think, the professionalism like involved, I think, in the tournament, which I thought was interesting. To have that in-depth, I think, space to be open and honest about like what you were working on, how you were feeling in that moment, to work through it together, I think, as a team on what we can improve in those situations was like one of the hugest values I had from that. Also that as professional, I think, as this tournament and referees were, back in the locker room, outside of the field, they were so open with themselves. Like they were so goofy and weird and such. And I took a moment, like, I think at that time was just like, so you can be like professional and serious in your work and still be open with yourself and your own attitudes in a way. And that felt very validating for me in a way, because I felt there was so much that I think I closed off with myself and kind of reserved my own like feelings, well, suppressed my own feelings and myself to be what my parents wanted me to be. Because I think on the first day when I think I landed in, I think, Denver, Colorado, which was where the tournament was being held, Rugby Town Sevens, there was this part of me that felt empty inside, because like so much of my own identity was held in the expectations and responsibility like my parents held me in. So I felt like lost, I think, without them, like being on my own for the first time. I did really feel scared. But seeing just how open like these people were with themselves, I think really felt validating. Like they're, in a way, they like kind of taught me that it is possible to find acceptance within yourself. I think on the last day, I think there was a banquet like after the tournament we all went to, and I'm usually like very like quiet and reserved, but for some reason like I felt like so happy and open. Like I'm not usually like the one to like go up and like talk to people and ask them like how they're doing, but that's just like how open and accepting they made me feel to actually open up and talk to them. Honestly, like the following day, I was kind of like, what in the world was I doing? It was like, I'm not that open. Like, and I was like literally thinking like I must have been crazy. Like I was thinking, was I drunk? No, I only took like one drink, like I think a White Claw alcohol. That was the only alcohol I drank at that time. And I was just like so, I think, excited and involved with them, because that's just how they made me feel.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
So you said, I mean, I think you're making very clear. It's interesting how important rugby and particularly being a rugby referee is, and you're like sort of gaining a sense of empowerment in yourself. And that, I think that's coming across really clearly. Do you think that is related as well to, you being able to come out as queer? Do you think there's a relationship between the two?
Oh, definitely. Because I think they taught me the acceptance, like finding acceptance with yourself. But for me, like it was one thing to, I think, what was it? It's one thing to try and accept things. It's one thing to understand what you're going through, and another to accept it. Because I feel they taught me that it is possible to accept yourself. But for me, it still took some time for me to accept myself, because I feel like there was still a lot that was battling, like especially with my own attractions and how I experienced it, because I think there was a lot of shame and how I experienced my own attraction, or like how I wasn't portrayed in the way like my sister experienced, or like how society like boxes people into being like monosexual. It's like you either have to be like straight or homosexual in a way. Because I think so the scholarship, back to like the scholarship that I received back in 2020 along with Will Nielsen, the scholarship was meant to go to, I think, Canada for 4 to 6 weeks, I think during the summer or so. Well, I think near the end of the year, like in November of 2021, one of the board members, Neil McDonald, decided with the others that we would go to Stellenbosch, South Africa, to the SA Refs Academy in South Africa. In a way, like when he told me that this was like a girls sevens tournament or so championship, and when he told me this, I was quite shocked, I think, in that moment, because then I really like felt the full weight of what I was actually getting myself into. I think it was a mixture. It was more of a mixture of, for me, like excitement, but more so, I think, being shocked and upset and shocked in regards to knowing that I'd be taken away from my family for a whole month. And I think that separation was, I think, the thing that was hurting me most, because I didn't want to be separated from my family. Because in that moment I was thinking, it was like saying no, but deep down inside I knew this was like something I had to do alone. So I felt like when I finally said yes to agreeing to go through with the plans, like I felt like the weight of the world on me, because making that decision, like I don't know, my dad like told me after when we were in the car, like if I didn't like agree to, he was smacked me on the back of the head, and I was like, okay. Like something like this is something that you have to go with, because my dad's like very proud, especially with the sort of rewards that comes into, I think, what we do in like rugby and such. But it was just like thinking about that was like so heavy to me, because like being homeschooled like my whole life, like my family and such as my parents were like the center of my support and love system. So just being like thinking about going someone foreign and going abroad for the very first time for like a whole month was like something very terrifying for me, because I felt like I was being taken away from my own love and support system I've known all my life. I stayed, I think, in Stellenbosch, South Africa for
Excuse me.
like late May through, I think, late June. But in that time, I really grew a deeper perspective of my own self in a way, because on that journey I had to take like 2-3 flights until I got to South Africa. But on that journey, I think really changed my life through the journey there and the journey like in South Africa coming back. There was like, I think one of my flights, I stayed, I think my first flight was from San Francisco to Boston, and from Boston to Amsterdam, from Amsterdam to South Africa. There was a moment, I think, in Amsterdam. I was really trying to hold back my tears. Like, I didn't want anyone to see me cry. It was just like the pain was really like weighing down on me. Like going like through the airport, like being by myself without my family. I was like walking around. I think the airport. I saw like tulips and everything. It reminded me of my mom. So I went to go like buy some like gifts, I think, for my family, especially like my mom, because she really loves tulips. And I think there was a moment, I think, I was at the cashier and she said, "Oh, so you're from America. Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from Sacramento, California. This is like my first time flying abroad to South Africa and the first time away from my family." And I think at that moment I was about to cry. And it was like, as I was like leaving, she told me like to wait, which made me like really surprised because I didn't understand why she wanted to continue talking with me. And she said, "Come back here." And she's just like, she said like, it is going to be hard like traveling on your own for the first time, but there's something special traveling on your own, because the difference with traveling on your own with someone, when you're with someone, like they filter like your own experiences of perspective of the world. But when you're on your own, you get to experience and your own perspective of the world on your own terms or in your own way. And that's what's like beautiful. As you get older, experiencing those stuff for yourself on your own. And I think in a deeper way that really like changed my whole perspective. I think traveling alone to, I think, South Africa and being away from my family in a way, because it just, my whole life was like with them, and my parents and family would always like kind of like hover over me and tell me what to do or what this was, what that was, and filter like my own perspective or experience of the world or so. And then just getting on that plane to South Africa just made me like like think deeply and reflect like on my own experience that would be continuing on my own. It was just something that was really, I don't know how to explain, very powerful in a way, just thinking of that, like just experiencing everything in my own way, in my own perspective of the world.
So is this when you figured out your sexual orientation and your gender?
In a way, like as I continued like through this journey, I think going to the academy in a way, I think the thing that hit strongest for me was that our host, I think Hendrik, would always tell me like, you have to start believing in yourself. It was like one of the main things that he would always say to me. But how I took that in was, not only do you have to believe in yourself for who you truly are. Not just like, it really made me want to cry. It's like, obviously, like, I'm not sure if he was really intending that much depth of what he was saying, but just that's how much it took to me. So then it was just like going back, I think, home from that whole experience. I feel like in a way I was able to like start believing in myself in that way, because first I had from that previous tournament finding the possibility of acceptance, and then from that whole experience believing in myself for who I truly am. So then it was just like I did like really start to embrace, I think, my like bisexuality in a way, because through those two experiences like really taught me those values of seeing myself who I truly am.
So you identify as bisexual.
Yeah.
Actually, can you talk more about your sexual orientation and what it means to you?
It means a lot for me, because I think growing up, some of like the religious values I think I grew up had sort of maybe guidance or understanding to myself in a way, because when we were like little growing up, my dad and mom would always teach us the golden rule, like do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And when I was little, I would always think like I want to treat people with kindness, because I believe like kindness and love deserves to be shown to like anyone, but also in a way when I was little, I would also think that I don't know like why it was like this weird understanding. Like I never I think told anyone, but it's like something that I just like believed like on my own when I was little that love could be found in like anyone regardless of their gender, but I didn't understand like my own feelings. But it was just like growing up, like you're taught that you're only allowed to be one way. Like you're either like heterosexual or homosexual, but I don't know where I learned that from. I just remember being told that like being like homosexual was bad because you couldn't like have a family or so, or the Bible said that like homosexual people were bad. So it was like for a long time like that's what like our religion said, and sometimes like that was what our family members were taught to, and kind of like expressed those sort of like ideologies in a way. So I kind of just hid my own feelings of like I didn't really feel that way towards people or like hate those people who like were like homosexual or gay or so like that. And I feel like in a way like my parents, they have very diverse taste in music in a way, and lots of like the love songs I would like grow up listening to, I couldn't understand like why when I would listen to it I would always imagine like being the woman that like the man would be singing about, but at the same time I would also imagine being the man singing about the woman that he loved. I couldn't explain like these feelings that I was feeling. And when we would watch like films or TV shows about romance or something like that, like I couldn't explain why like I felt the same way I felt like in music, that when these romance films or shows would occur, I would always imagine like being like the woman in the romance, like as the receiver of like his love, or being the man, like being the giver of love to the woman in that way. And I couldn't understand like these sort of feelings. I kept like suppressing my own feelings because they were going against, I think, my own values or like religion of what I was taught when I was younger. So it was just like there was a lot of dismissal and suppression, I think, growing up for me that ended up like leading to a lot of shame growing up, because some of like the things I grew up in, sort of that silence of not having my own voice, I think ever since I was little, I think led to a lot of self-hatred and suicidal thoughts for me, because I felt like I couldn't express myself, express my own feelings. I couldn't see myself in a way, only through the lens of others and how others like own my own voice. So it's just like I did develop so much self-hatred and suicidal thoughts because I felt there was like so much peace, I think, there would be being taken out of the life I lived, I think, on Earth. Because I didn't know I don't know what concept or imagination of what heaven is, but just the thought of nothing, feeling nothing, like this aura of nothingness. There was like some sort of peace to me thinking about that, like to relieve me from all the pain that I felt. I think growing up was something that was very calming to me. Growing up, so I think later on, I think there was this instant where my sister, I think, introduced me to one of her like friends, I think in October of 2020 or something, and she was like the first openly bisexual person that I think I ever met, and I think that was then I think I realized that okay, I think that's like what I am, because these feelings of emotion and attraction that I feel, there is a sexuality that's outside of the box that I think I was taught ever since I was either heterosexual or homosexual. There's something that's inclusive to both of those two. And it wasn't until I think, well, along those ways on this journey of being a referee, I did find acceptance and believing in myself in a way. But it wasn't until I think I got into the QSA club, I think, in the fall of 2022, I think in the fall semester, to actually be involved in sort of this like the queer environment or so, because I was always like isolated at home with like my family. I don't think I've ever like experienced being in that sort of queer environment, because around the same time, I think when I first joined my first, I think, club like in college or so, or just ever joining like a club or something, was the Pacific Islander Club. And I felt like welcome and accepted, I think, on the cultural aspect from that, because growing up, it's like just the way how we were sheltered our whole life. We were kind of distanced from our other relatives in our culture in a way, because of the life we lived. So it's just like being inclusive in that environment and getting that sort of like welcoming and acceptance, I think, for my own community felt like so much to me, like from that. But at the same time, I felt limited in how I could express like my own sexuality, because some of my other like classmates felt uncomfortable with sort of that topic of sexuality or queerness. So I still felt like silenced in a way, like for myself. So I would still be expressive, like of our cultural like connection and everything like that. But I felt like I couldn't really talk about this or express the way I really felt. And when I found about the QSA club, I felt like there was a part of me that felt like even more accepted in a way, that there is a place that I can go to and express myself with people who are like me. And I felt like for me, it was like the first time that I was able to actually go in depth, because we did like, I think the first time I went to the QSA club, we did an introduction of who we are, what our background are. And I think it was optional if we wanted to be open about our sexuality. And I felt like on the first meeting, I think I just went like all out of how I was feeling and like how suppressed I felt, like in my own like spaces, like with my family, my culture, and everything like that, of how I felt, and how this, as they explained, this is a safe space, I think, to express who you are. I think that meant like so much more, I think, from when I joined my PI club, because that part of my sexuality like means so much to me, and how, in a way, my own sexuality felt like it was owned by others, as well as like growing up when I hadn't felt like I had no voice, or others around me had owned how they saw me as well. And being in that space, it's queer, specifically that queer space, made me like feel more open to actually express myself for the first time, go in depth about myself. So, and from there on, I think really gave me the space to actually learn more about myself and my sexuality and how I experience attraction, that it is valid. Because I think for so many years, after that instant, I think after I met my sister's friend who was open bisexual, there was so much, I think, I disregarded taking that sort of label bisexuality, because I dismissed my own attractions, because I felt for me especially, I thought bisexuality can only be like determined from the sex that you had with that gender or so, or in a way that's how I viewed sexuality. I thought sexuality, I think, was based on the sexual acts that you have with that gender or so. So I felt very excluded, I think, for so many years, either being heterosexual or homosexual or in between, because I felt like you had to be like sexually explicit with your own self with others. And my sister would constantly like pressure me into being, it's like, you can only find yourself through others, such as sexual acts with others, and that being sexual was part of like being so-called an adult or being mature in that sort of regard. And always felt like excluded from that. And then after, I think being included in that queer space, I think for the QSA club, I started doing my own research, I think, of what bisexuality really is. And I realized there's more depth into sexuality. And it wasn't until I think this year I realized that sexual orientation is based on attraction and not action. And really opened my mind in so many ways, especially how I experience attraction to others. Really felt like so much to me in a way.
So you left off talking about your involvement in the, what is it called, the QSA, the Queer Straight Alliance, right?
Queer Straight Alliance.
And you said that helped you figure out your sexual orientation more. Did it also help you figure out your gender identity and expression?
And I think that wasn't until I think this year or so with gender expression in a way, because I feel like I'm more feminine in a way, but I don't know how to explain this like sort of like, I don't know how to call it, masculine sort of way. There was like an instance, I think, there's a San Jose women's team that they all wear mustaches or something like that, which is so funny. I think after one of like the Sevens games that I refereed, like one of them said if I wanted to wear a mustache or so, and I said I accepted, and I wore actually a mustache. It was like very funny in a way, and some of the other referees in our group were like, you're a disappointment to like your mom who's like over there, and I was like, I'm already a disappointment. But there was something in that moment, I think, that I felt like I was, in a goofy way, I was like, wow, I'm feeling fabulously manly. Like I feel like a man in a way, like this mustache I'm having. But there was like, I don't know how to explain this sort of like authentic feeling that I was like having in that moment or so, like kind of like just having that sort of like embracement of like masculinity in a way or so. It's not in the clothes, but there was that moment that I felt, I think, in that moment that there was like more to it for me in a way, like more true. I don't know how to explain it. Like I think a lot lately I've been looking into like drag queen culture and for women who like kind of like dress that way, like as men, known as like drag kings in a way. I feel like it's like I don't know how to explain that sort of like genderqueer expression that I feel, but most of the clothes that I like wear, like I still regard myself as very feminine, but there's still that like sort of deep part of me that like feels genderqueer, like in those kind of like bold men or values, that I kind of have a mixture of those two, like feminine, masculine, like sort of like energy in a way. It goes really deep, but this is like something that I've only started experiencing this year, so I don't know like how much more understanding I'll continue to have of my own like self-expression like later on, but this is just, I think, some of the building blocks like I'm currently feeling right now. But going back to sexual orientation, like I feel like before I joined the QSA club, like I had like maybe like a surface level understanding of my like bisexuality, but it wasn't until like I think I got into the QSA club, got more involved in sort of that queer space environment, that I really started doing like my own research about my own sexuality and my own like experience of bisexuality. And like, I think they broke it down more into the attraction that bisexual people experience. It's like very fluid and not this sort of like simple binary that many people try to like portray, that it's only 50-50. I think there was so much, I think, validation that I felt when I started doing more research and learning more that bisexuality is more fluid in the like attraction that you experience, and that like being bisexual, someone who's bisexual can be entirely different from the next person who identify as bisexual, because in a way I learned that bisexuality is an umbrella term for all the sexualities attracted to more than one gender. And I learned that there's like other identities that fall under, I think, that umbrella of bisexuality. So there was this like sort of like calm acceptance and validation that I felt, I think, learning like more about my sexuality and going like more into like how I learned that I was asexual. I think there was an instance that happened, I think, when there was this first date I went on with a guy or so, and we had like a very like fun time together. We went like restaurant hopping or something like that. And then there was a moment, I think we went back, I think, to my place or so. Went back up to my room or so, and we were just like talking or so, and I think I was taking off my earrings, and he was like suggestively like touching the bed or something, and we were both sitting at the end of it, and I think I was feeling kind of like uncomfortable, and so I sat on the floor, and we were both sitting on the floor or so. I think this was after we went to a bar and we were like drinking or so like that, but I didn't drink enough as much as he did, because he was like more experienced in alcohol and he wanted me to drink more, but I didn't really drink as much as he did. So while we were having that conversation, like I was feeling all these like types of way or something, and I could feel that he wanted to like pursue more of the sexual like act than I was, because I was really feeling that huge like disconnection. Like I felt like at that moment I was feeling like forced to act, I think, with him like sexually, and but it wasn't like, it was like I was having that like deep reflection and self-awareness in that moment, because it was like kind of like I think the alcohol was making me want to like act like sexually in that moment, but like in my head I was feeling like the peer pressure that I was feeling forced to act upon it, because that was what was socially acceptable or something, especially within this situation. But it wasn't really something I really wanted to do, because I think that comes from having that self-awareness that growing up I felt like I had to constantly satisfy and make those around me feel comfortable, when it wasn't really something I wanted to do. And it made me like lose sight of who I truly was. And then having that self-awareness in that moment, it was really something I didn't want to do. So I forced myself to go to sleep, I think, in that moment, like on his shoulder. And I think he didn't understand like what was going on. I think he was a bit disappointed of how it turned out, but in a way, like I felt like so much happier that I continued to stand by like how I felt in that moment, and not force myself to just satisfy like the desires that he mostly felt at that moment, that he was like projecting onto me, which is something that I think I constantly felt like growing up. There's just having that constant projection of everyone's desires upon me. It was never something that I wanted or felt for my own. It was just always to satisfy everyone like else but me, or the wants and needs that I actually felt for myself. And going more in depth, like learning like more about attractions or so, the thing that I think that struck me learning about like bisexuality and the connection with asexuality was that like something known as demisexual, gray sexual, and frail sexual is like all sort of elements that I experience under that sort of spectrum. It's like, for me, bisexuality and how I experience with all those attractions, the element that I hold more is emotional intelligence. Like I hold that more like value than sexual connection to people, because I feel like I can't really connect sexually with someone without having that level of emotional like connection with others. Because when I feel like others like around me try to project their own sexual desires upon me, I feel like so uncomfortable because we don't have, I think, that emotional connection or in depth of knowing each other like that long. I think that's what I felt so, I think, validating when I learned about like demisexuality, that you can't really feel that sort of sexual tension without that emotional connection that you feel with someone. And that was really mainly something that I felt, but I kind of disregarded that because I think my like attitudes are, before what I heard about asexuality is like someone that was very weird, didn't experience any like sexual tension with anyone, but it's like learning much more about asexuality. There's much more depth into, I think, it than just focusing on the sexual acts of someone. It's just like have a low sexual drive of someone and all these other things. So it's just like my asexuality and bisexuality just go hand in hand in that sort of way of how I experience bisexuality. And what's amazing is that I only like started to realize I was asexual this year. Just kind of like having that more involvement, I think, in open discussions with the QSA club that helped me like understand that.
So what's your experience been in the Pacific Islander Student Club? Have you, I guess, a very general question. I know I'm sort of skipping around a little bit, but,
that's all right.
or going back to that. But how meaningful has that been to you? I know you said a little bit about that. I guess we'll start there, and then if you could also talk about your experience being out as queer in that club.
So it was like I think it means like a lot like to me as well. Just as much as like the queer, the QSA club means to me, because I think there's two like different like aspects that mean a lot in my life, like my own sexuality with the QSA club and my cultural family background with my Pacific Islander club. Deep rooted in that, because I think growing up I felt like sort of isolated or distanced from my own like culture in a way. I think growing up because we were sheltered our whole life, and kind of just having that sort of deeper connection with like other islanders helps you feel seen in a way, especially academically in a way, because there's so few of us, I think, that actually go to continue with our education, especially like in college. Because I think there's like so many kids, I think, with their parents, they're pushed to play sports or so, like throughout like high school and such like that. And lots of them just end up like settling just for that. Like after getting their high school degree, they just go to work and continue like living for their family or so like that. Like they never like go out higher opportunities for themselves or their families. And I really felt like isolated in that sort of sense. Not really having like peers, I think, that looked like me in higher education. What was it? Earlier this year, I think me and some of my other like classmates, a part of the Pacific Islander clubs, received, I think, a scholarship or so, or invitation known to go to, I think, a conference known as the PAHI conference, like Asian Pacific Islanders and higher education. And it's like they told me to sign up for something, like they told me like to write like an essay of like my own experience like signing up for the scholarship process. And finally that came back, and I think sometime near the end of like March, like some of us and some other like students who were part of the PI center were with us too. And I think for me, I really felt like a deeper connection with my family and culture through that like conference, because they talked about like the isolation, displacement, and all these other things, like trying to how isolating it can be, like entering those like environments that weren't made for us in a way. And there was all these like other like workshops we went into, like microaggression, and many more. Like I forgot what most it was, but there was like I think this moment, I think, during the conference. I really was crying the whole conference. It made me like really upset because just how much in depth and I felt connected. I think in our own cultural experiences. I think in the Asian Pacific Islander communities that they spoke about really felt deep for me, or hit a lot home for me in a way, because it's just like, especially like how I experienced like those spaces as like a female referee, as a like a young Pacific Islander woman, like in these professional referee spaces. I knew exactly like how like they felt, like being in those spaces where you feel like they weren't made for you, or we don't feel accepted in those spaces because it's like heavily like white male dominated, or other like involvement through that. And it gave me a deeper sense of the value that we have entering those spaces and making a difference as we continue on our journeys in higher education, or may that be like in the careers that we follow in the future, or so that we make a difference for the people like following in our footsteps behind us. Meant like so much to me in a way, like going through like my own academics or so, especially like personal struggles that I have. I feel like there is like so much importance having like fellow Pacific Islanders that look like us in a way that we can go to and have that cultural understanding and experiences of like what we face in a way. Because I think earlier this year, I think in March, there was an incident that happened with me refereeing, and I received like so much physical and emotional trauma. I couldn't understand like what I was going through, and I felt like the only person I could talk to was one of like my counselors, who was also Tongan, who. The only reason I felt like I can only talk to her because she like had more understanding of our cultural like background and experience and stuff, so it felt easier for her to talk to. Because in a way, like I feel like that importance of having like someone like that has that cultural understanding and experience from someone like us is so important, because we feel like more comfortable and open to talk more in depth with how we're experiencing things. Because when we're talking with someone like outside of that, it can feel very like exhausting, because I feel it's like we have to justify our own experiences of how we're going through these sort of situations in life, because there's a lack of that understanding and experience. Because in a way, it's someone outside of, I think that they would just like to just group that all together and generalize our own experience. But through generalizing like those experiences that we have, you're missing like that sort of empathy and understanding of what we're going through. And I think that hurts like more, I think, in doing that. And it was, from my experiences, especially when I was dealing with that like sort of physical, emotional trauma, it did feel painful, like having to talk with someone outside of sort of that space, of someone that knows our cultural like understanding experiences through that. Because I think this year, I started going to therapy for the very first time to try and like deal with my physical and emotional trauma. And it was hard connecting with my like therapist in a way, because like there was so much like lack of that sort of like cultural understanding and experience. But we were able to like go through some of like the hard elements, I think, like in my life that was like hard for me to accept with myself in a way. So we still were able to find that compatibility and working through those problems and situations that we had. But that's how I feel with, I think, experiencing like faculty members or like that have that sort of cultural understandings. I think you can still like have compatibility with other, I think, staff members that have similar cultural understandings, but there's a difference from having similarities and actually knowing like someone from our community with that experience and knowledge.
Are there Pacific Islander, specifically Tongan faculty at your college that you relate to?
I think some of them like at Rise, like specifically I think Leah Taufua, she's like half Tongan, but she knows like our cultural understanding and experience and everything. So I feel like there's a huge connection with her. I don't think there's many like teachers that are Pacific Islanders, but like she was one of my professors. I think when we did the Indus, I think class or so, that was mostly had a general focus on Pacific Islanders. So she's like my professor and I think counselor in a way.
So you were mentioning to me off camera some of your experiences as being out as queer in the Pacific Islander Club.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate on camera about what those experiences were? Well, first say what those experiences were and sort of, I guess, how that makes you feel.
I think, I think it was like in the fall of like 2022, like, because I was in an Indus like class with some of my fellow classmates where it was like an Indus class with a general focus on Pacific Islanders.
Can you explain what Indus is? Sorry.
I think, I don't know how to explain it. I think it was like a business class or introduction to, I think, college, like for freshmen or like sophomores. I think that's what the Indus class was. It was more like introduction or guidance, I think, for students coming to college or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
For that Indus class, and I think learning through that class, we had, I think, to do a presentation at the end, I think, of the semester or so, and we all did like I think presentations and opened up about like what values that we appreciate most, I think, from the semester and what we learned in this class. And I think that was the first time I think I actually opened up about my like own bisexuality in a way, because I mentioned like this club has done so much for me in feeling seen, heard, and valued for who I am. And that also led to me joining the QSA club, where it made me feel even more so in that regard of my sexuality and bisexuality. I said that very quietly in a way, because it was just like, for me, it was just like, I was still taking those steps of like actually telling people that I was bisexual, because it's, in a way, it's like I've internalized so much of that biphobia and such. So it was something I was still trying to unlearn in that moment and finding acceptance of who I truly am. So I think in that way, it's like some of them, they were a little odded out. It was like something that like didn't really like discuss more. I think after like saying that or announcing that I am bisexual, it was just like, it felt like a little awkward, I think, in the room. Like it was kind of like, wow, okay, this isn't really something we discuss like about sexuality. That's kind of weird. I was like, even though like they talk about like sex all the time, like, you know, I think for like girls like going out with guys or so, or like the boys always talking about like what girls are like pretty or so, or like are trying to go out with them, but just to openly like discuss about your sexual orientation is still like very weird in a way, especially in our own community. It's kind of like taboo for something to talk about, and most of my own like family members are still like shunned for being openly like gay in a way, for that sense. So it was still something I think that's come a long way since then and now, because I feel like I'm a little more accepted now because of how openly more I am about my own like bisexuality. So I think that's kind of like taught some of my other like classmates to be more accepting in that. But there's still a lot of like attitudes and actions like from them that I still find uncomfortable and unacceptable in a way. But honestly,
What are those attitudes?
so it's attitudes, I think, of being homophobic, using language such as like gay as derogatory to others, like behavior, like being feminine in a way, being emotional, especially like with some of like my male classmates towards each other. It feels very like uncomfortable, like sort of having to experience those actions from them, because I'm very open with my own sexuality, but in a way they're still like sort of repressed and sort of like ashamed of being open about that, but they're open about being dismissive and using language such as that, which still confuses me in a way, and I still find it inappropriate.
So, from your own experiences, can you talk a little bit more about what it means to be queer or what it's like to be queer in Tongan culture?
Well, I think it's very complex in a way, because I'm not really out to most of my other like family members besides I think my sister and I think one of my cousins. I think only a few of like my other like family members I think are aware of it, but I've not really come out to like most of my other like family members in a way. But just having that experience, it's really something that I'm trying to define for myself in a way, and how I experience like my own sexuality and knowing who I truly am. I think learning and accepting, I think those qualities of my own like sexuality and embracing that for who I am. Because in a way, I still feel like very reserved. As I hold myself in a way, because I have so much like respect and honor for my own family. So I think there's a lot of like concealment I still feel like with my own family in a way. But when I'm outside of that like sort of space, I'm able to like embrace my own like queerness and other things that are true to who I am. But when I'm with my family, I think I kind of like embrace some of those qualities in small ways, from like the clothes I dress and how I think open I am about my feelings in a way, but not so explicit to being open, I think, to my own sexual orientations, like with my family in that sort of regard.
And do you think it would be hard to be out to your family?
I think it would be as hard, I think, as I thought it would growing up, because I think growing up, I think the only reasons why I felt like so suppressed, I think, growing up, because of being seen as a problem, sort of like disrespectful or shameful to my family, just in the regards of our cultural and religious backgrounds. But through my parents' perspective, they were very open. My mom and dad had the same like ideologies, like thinking outside the box or so, or as my mom always says, like going against the currents or so like that. Because I had, I think, a recent conversation with my mom. Like it was a conversation that like I think she always spoke about, I think, when we were younger, but I think just having more depth and understanding who I am and just how she was explaining it, like, I really hit like home for me. Or I just felt that validation hearing her like be open about her experience, like when she was because she had a lot of difficulties with people trying to have her conform to like their religion, especially when she married my dad, because my mom's Catholic and my dad, his family was Pentecostal, or known in Tonga as Pentecoste in a way. So there was a struggle with that when my mom married my dad. Like his family members wanted her to conform to like their religion, but my mom stood by her ground and stayed with her own religion as being Catholic. So I think my dad's family didn't like her for doing that. So she had her own views about religion, and my mom was very open-minded about other people's religions and their own values and such like that. And she mentioned the story, I think, when she was younger, like when she saw in the news, I think when the punk rock movement happened around, I think the late 70s or early like 80s or so. Like my mom didn't find disgust in like the way they dressed or the way they thought or something like that. Like my mom said she was like very interested because it takes a lot of like courage to go against the crowd, especially like with the majority of people like at that time. I think that she really appreciated like those people for going out and expressing themselves like in the way they dressed and the way they acted, or so she could really appreciate that sort of like openness. And that really like came into when she would listen to artists like Madonna and Prince, because they were sort of the same like elements of like going against the crowd and embracing, I think, their true identity, like especially with Prince wearing the jewelry that he wore, or so like being a man, or so he didn't care about anything that anyone else like thought. He just went with how he felt and what he stayed true to himself as. And it kind of like made me cry in a way, because it's just like that sort of acceptance and indifference that my mom like always felt, because she always explained that when we were younger, but I didn't really understand sort of the things that she was saying, because I still felt that weight and suppression from our culture and religious values. But just hearing that like made me feel validated and accepted of just the appreciation and value that my mom saw in people who were embracing themselves for who they are. Like I really wanted to open her up to my sexual orientation to her at that moment, but I felt like she already like understood me in a way, seeing that by explaining sort of the story, which made me feel seen, heard, and valued like from my mom. And my dad sort of like had the same sort of like way of life in that way. With his sort of like, I think, views and like Rastafari life or kind of spirituality, like sort of involvement in elements in life, and having past lives and so like that. So I felt, even though like I'm not fully open about my sexual orientation, like with my parents, I feel they still like accept and understand, I think, the value of being true to who you are and accepting that sort of indifference of being outside of the box in a way.
So I think that you said you also are part Puerto Rican, right?
Oh, yeah, that's like from my mom's side. It's I feel like it's a little like complicated with my mom's side, because my dad, he was born and raised, I think, in Tonga with his family, and then moved to the US. But my mom's side is a little more like complex in a way, because Tonga is like the only like indigenous sovereign monarchy in the whole like Pacific like ocean or so, and they have like 32 to 34, I think, houses of nobility that were given titles, I think, from the royal family in Tonga. And on my mom's side, one of her families are one of those noble houses. And my mom's like mom ended up marrying like my grandpa, who was like Puerto Rican, and they had like 2 children. Like my mom's like older sister, like Christina, and then her. So they only had 2 daughters. But my mom like had that mixture of cultural background, like being Puerto Rican and Tongan, and my mom was like open with her experience growing up that she always felt like an outcast because some of her Tongan relatives didn't accept her and her sister for being like mixed, like Puerto Rican and Tongan. But in a way, she was more accepted, I think, from some of her Tongan relatives than her sister because her sister looked more white than she did, I think. Like my mom, who was like more like, who looked more Pacific Islander than her sister. So she still had that acceptance, but growing up, like treated very differently in society. Sort of growing up with that sort of discrimination in a way. So that was like pretty like tough on my mom's part. But in a way, like growing up, she always taught us that value of nobility and holding yourself up with a certain standard of respect and honor for your family. From, I think, my mom's background of coming like from a noble family, I think in Tonga, because she would always tell us like here in America, like we're just living an ordinary life, but not to forget our like noble heritage back in Tonga. Because when we go back to Tonga, there's a level of respect and honor that you have to like maintain for yourself and your family, because that means so much, I think, back home, especially in our culture and such like that. And my mom's experience, I think, going to Tonga for the first time, I think in the early 90s or so, everyone knows your family like heritage. So when she went there with some of her friends, she was like separated from some of the other like Tongan girls she was there with because of her noble heritage. She wasn't allowed to go where she wanted to. She wasn't allowed to do things that she wanted to because of her family heritage or so. She was constantly followed by like her aunties and at sometimes guards to keep her separated from like commoners and just the level of status that they had there. So I don't know how it is when I go there. I'm not sure if it's like different, but our mom always taught us to remember our heritage and Tongan nobility that comes from her family.
Okay. So do you work?
Currently, my only like job is like refereeing. So I think I've taken time off from like working because at the same time I've been going to therapy to deal with the physical and emotional trauma I've been like experiencing this past year.
So do you mind if I ask how what you just said about the physical and emotional trauma you're trying to process and deal with in therapy, has that affected your education at all?
Yes. I think during the spring semester, I ended up failing all my classes from the physical and emotional trauma that I've been experiencing this year. And I think there were some other classes I was taking beside, like Chem 400, I think this semester, but I ended up having to drop that because of the physical emotion trauma I've been continuing to experience, I think, this semester.
Is there anything that your professors have done to support you that you find has been particularly helpful to keep you in the class and doing well in the class?
I think the hugest support that I had was from my chem and math professor. They were very like open for me seeking help. And I think the most like validating thing, like my chem professor told me that this class will always be here. No matter if you fail or not, it will always be here for you to continue again or have a chance for you to go again. So don't take this so hard on yourself if you do fail this class. It will still be here for you to come back to. Which really like felt validating because I was stressing out like from the classes that I was failing. But just having that reassurance really like brightened up, I think, or opened my mind to like how it was like dealing with the classes that I was taking, I think, during those semesters.
So what community college do you attend?
Sac City College, and I take some of like the other colleges, I think, online. I think some of the 2 online classes that I'm taking are from like, I think ARC or Folsom Lake College.
You're mainly at SEC.
Yeah, it's the closest to me.
Yeah. So are you generally full-time or part-time, or is there a mix in there?
I hope to become a full-time student once again, but I think right now I'm just a part-time student, trying to, I think, bring my mental health back to my academic level of connection.
And do you feel like you have the mental health support that you need?
Yes, like, especially when I'm not feeling very well. Like, I do have those resources going to counseling and therapy to get through that, and just having the reassurance of my professors who are very understanding really helps, I think, getting through with that.
How long have you been a community college student in the district?
About almost 3 years.
Did you take a little break between your homeschooling for high school and going to community college?
It was homeschool all the way up until, I think, college. And I think I did have some breaks, I think, in between that time, I think, to focus on work. And it was only like recently, I think, through the fall semester of 2022 that I became like a full student, and spring semester, but now I'm just back part-time trying to bring back up my mental health and everything.
And what are you majoring in?
Biochemistry.
Oh, why are you majoring in biochemistry? What brought you to that major?
Well, ever since I was little, I think I had a huge interest in crime. We would always watch like a lot of crime shows, I think, growing up, and one of my like favorite crime shows was Law and Order SVU on Special Victims Unit, or so mostly dealt around sexual assault, sexual violence. It was weird because I wanted to become a lawyer to represent, I think, some of those victims and help go through those cases. I think that sort of pathway didn't last long for me because I realized like how much dedication and years it goes into like going into that field of being like a lawyer. And I just went with my other passion, like science or the forensic level aspect of that, like helping victims in a way, like going behind the scenes, doing autopsies, all the scientific work that goes into that. I think the show that really like embraced sort of that field for me was like the X-Files. There was this character like Dana Scully. I think her field of work and experience, I think, really gave the hugest like inspiration and passion for me to pursue that sort of field of forensic science. So I think that was like the hugest things like going into my major, and the reason why I chose like biochemistry is so I have a huge like appreciation for my biology and chemistry, and when I read more into like the umbrella term for forensic science, they said when you get a bachelor's degree in a hard science or so, you can pursue like any like sort of field, I think, in forensic science, or they'll kind of direct you to your own path within that umbrella to what works best for you. So I think that's what led me into my major for biochemistry.
It's interesting. I also have been watching a lot of Law and Order SVU recently. I come back to it again. And I think it's in season 25 or 4. Or something like that, you know?
But there was like a sort of incident I think that happened recently. I was at like another professional like tournament with some other referees, and we all like went to I think a bar afterwards or so there was a lot of like male. Usually the majority of the referees in our group are like male. And there was like a few other girls with us, and I like to dress very fabulously for myself in a way. But there was a moment, I think, we were at the table, some of the male referees like were with us, and like one of them randomly asked like, from the way I'm dressed, like he just like looked up and down at me like, why am I not like hooking up with anyone there at the bar? And I asked him, what do you mean? And he just said, there's like a wide variety of like people here. Why aren't you going out with them? And I said, I just like to enjoy my own company with all of you. I don't understand that, what you mean. It's not really my level of standard to go out there. And he said, oh, you have standards. What's your type? And I think at that moment I quietly said that I'm bisexual. So my type is a little more complex. And he said, oh, so you have a type. What turns you on? What gets you going? And I was just kind of like, what kind of like question is that? And he said, I asked him, the real question is like, why are you so interested? And he said, I just want to know. Like, I just want to know. I was starting to feel like uncomfortable, I think, in that moment, because I was feeling pressured from the men around me to answer. And just having that self-awareness, I think I asked him, how do you experience attraction? And he said, I'm not going to answer that because I'm married. And I think at that moment I was like so confused, and I was kind of like, oh, okay, well, in a way I was trying to invite him into a deeper conversation, I think, about sexuality. So then after he said that, I said, okay, well, to understand how I experience sexuality, like how do I experience attraction, is that you have to understand the asexual spectrum and the bisexual spectrum. And he said, well, why are you making things so complicated? And I felt like entirely dismissed of my own experiences, because then he's saying, why you have to make things complicated? Then continue to repeat the same question, like, what's my type? Why I'm not going out with anyone, like hooking up with the people there? What turns me on? What gets me going? And then at that moment, I just realized that he doesn't want to hear anything I want to say. He just wants to simplify my own experiences. So I finally said, it's not my priority. And then he told me that, that's a simple answer. And I said, no, simple questions have complex answers. And then he said, no, simple questions have simple answers. And I think there was just a moment of silence that just felt so awkward, because I was kind of like, okay, well, obviously you didn't want to hear anything I had to say. And I think it wasn't until like after I think that incident that it hurt me like so much in a way, because he was really trying to disrespect me in front of like all the other like male referees that were around us, and the way that he was getting some of the other male like referees like riled up to ask me those inappropriate questions, because after that situations, like as we continued throughout that night, they would ask me like, well, what's your type? And I said, it's more complex. And say, why are you trying to make things so complicated? But in a way they're dismissing the own complexities of my own sexual orientation, or having a lack of effort to take the time to actually listen and understand like my own experiences. And it really like after I think going home and reflecting on that incident, like really like hurt me, I think, in a way, kind of reflecting that most men and people, well, majority like men, like dismiss women entirely of how they're dressed and kind of project all those like sexualizations onto them with, out their consent. I think was really hurtful thinking about that. I think when I talked to my mom about that, I wasn't really open about like the specific sexual orientation I was open about in that conversation, and my mom like reminded me that like how dare like such a like man who's married and much older than me to ask such inappropriate questions to a young woman like myself, and how those are like private questions and something so personal to be asked in front of like an open room, like especially like men, of what turns me on and what gets me going. It's such a personal question that has no right to ask a young woman about those, I think, questions. And just knowing that I don't have to explain to anyone about myself or how that sort of like, how should I say, like just no one's allowed sort of that like personal like information about who you are or so like that. No one has that right, and you yourself are responsible who you feel comfortable like kind of expressing that sort of like sensitive information about yourself with.
So I wanted to ask some education questions. I know you said you were homeschooled your entire life and then you decided to go to community college. Can you talk a little bit about how you've liked community college in general since you've started?
It's honestly been a whole new experience for me, because growing up, being sheltered my whole life, being homeschooled, and just like working on homework with my other siblings. And so it's been a huge adjustment, I think, going into community college and having like set times and sort of like deadlines to complete work or so. It was a whole new experience, I think, for me, trying to adjust to and working along those timelines. And I think it wasn't until I think the spring, I think of 22 that I took my first in-person classes, which was a whole new experience in and of itself, because I'd never been to a classroom before with people or such like that. But one of my first like in-person, I think, classes was Chem 300 or so, and my professor was, I think, non-binary and lesbian, and she was very open with her experience of them and their wife, or so kind of have that inclusive like queer involvement. I think in our class, as we taught like as they taught like chemistry and everything. So I felt like sort of inclusive in that sort of like environment. So it was a new sort of environment to adjust to, but I didn't feel sort of excluded in the sense that I didn't feel welcomed in a way. I'm still kind of socially awkward because I know I'm an introvert, but I still felt kind of accepted in a way, like seeing other students like passionate about like what they're studying, as well as dispassionate or unpassionate about what they're doing, like struggling with work, and that sort of like struggle of trying to balance like work with studying in a way was a new sort of perspective to experience through understanding my other fellow classmates.
So, I guess I'll ask this question. So have you taken classes? I know you just said you had this professor who's non-binary lesbian, but have you taken classes that either wholly or in part focus on queer and trans topics?
I think my first class ever inclusive of topics with the LGBTQ like involvement or values That was a class I took, I think, this year during the spring semester about psychology and human sexuality. So I feel like it was more so that briefly discussed and some in depth. I thought it was interesting, I think, from the introduction, like my professor had when he asked why students, I think, that were in our class, the reason why they took this class. And the majority of some of them said they want to understand why people take these labels, or like why they're gay or queer, and like how like their experience are like in their sort of like sexual orientations. Just from like my perspective, it was interesting like to hear that, because in a way I felt like just the way they explained it felt like they wanted to understand this problem. I think of because there was a mixture of like interest, but also this problematic kind of view of understanding like why someone's like queer, or why someone chose like the sexual like orientation that they did. I think they talked about the Kinsey scale. They went in some depth about being polyamorous, and other views from that involvement of psychology and sexuality. And so, but there was a lot more, I think, my professor, there were some discussions I had like with my professor afterwards, and he said for a long time he's been trying to incorporate more of like sort of the queer values into like this course, but it hasn't really gone through as much as like he wanted it to in a way. But he's still trying to learn more how he can incorporate some of those values in depth, I think, through like his classes, as we talked about with.
Do you think that the way that professor covered LGBTQ topics did it feel mainly introductory, or did it feel in depth?
It felt sort of a mixture of the two, because I think there was a lot more I wanted to understand, I think, from the academic sense or view as they saw, like, or viewed our experience or values from the LGBTQ community.
Is that the only class you've taken that's inclusive of queerness?
Yes. I think there's a few others, I think, related to, I think, on gender studies, and I think women's psychology, but I haven't taken those classes yet. But I think that was like the first class that was, I think, inclusive of some elements of like the LGBTQ community. I wish they like went more in depth into, I think, some of those values. But I'm hoping that some of those other classes that are more involved, I think, in gender studies, will have deeper discussions on that.
So I think there's an LGBTQ literature class that's offered here and in a couple other classes, but not every semester. And usually it's one section. And then there's Intro to LGBTQ Studies that's offered at ARC and CRC. Again, not even, well, at ARC now it's one section every semester. At CRC, it's not every semester necessarily. Mm-hmm. And I think they're just starting to, they're going to offer Intro to LGBTQ Studies here for the first time.
Yeah, I think I definitely would want to take up one of those classes.
So why do you think you would want to take that class? Why do you think it's important, or one of those classes, why do you think it's important to include queer and trans topics in the curriculum for you yourself to be seen and included in your college?
The importance that I personally feel, why it's important to be, especially like being more inclusive and bringing more awareness for people who like self-identify with our own like sexualities, to be seen, heard, and valued for who we are. Because I feel like if there's a lack of that awareness, it brings like more ignorance and hatred to people who identify or experience like sort of the openness to their own sexualities, which I feel is a huge part, I think, in society, because there's a lack of knowledge or acceptance, or just a huge amount of ignorance, like for people who are open about like their own sexualities and such like that.
And have you had experiences taking classes that are inclusive of the Pacific Islander or Tongan experience?
And I think both of those go like hand in hand, I think, from a lack of information, because when we go into cultural like history or so, I think there's just a scheme or just like a very small percentage of cultural history of Pacific Islander history taught in classes, because like there's not much known about it, and there's not much research that's actually been done and that's been inclusive in those sort of classrooms. So I feel that sort of isolation, as I do with the queer history and such, or lack of it being taught in the classroom and academic spaces, the same way I feel I think Pacific Islander history taught in the academic field as well.
So if you said you were homeschooled, did you get more about Pacific Islander culture and history because you were homeschooled when you were younger?
Yeah, my mom and dad, they were very open about like our own history and such, I think. And that made me really connect with our own culture. But then to go to an academic space where there's none at all, or just like a limited amount of that, it can feel very like isolating, intimidating, because you feel like you're not seen and valued for who you are, because it does feel in a way for me personally that you have to conform to their standards and level of acceptance like in those spaces, because you're sort of marginalized, and sort of the knowledge that's being taught about your own culture in those spaces.
So how do you think you would feel if you were taking a class, say, not in queerness, in history or literature, something like that, sociology, whatever the topic in the humanities and social sciences? How would you feel if you were taking some class and you unexpectedly had a professor who included, information about Pacific Islander experiences in a like in-depth and respectful way? How would that make you feel?
Honestly, it would mean like so much to my heart, because like being in like the PI club, as I mentioned before, I felt more seen and valued for who I am, like in this academic space, because it can feel isolating, intimidating when you go in these spaces where like you're the only Pacific Islander in that space. And you feel like you can't really express who you are, because there's no one with like your cultural understanding and experience with that background or so.
So you would like it?
Yeah, it mean like so much to my heart, and that's how much like the support system I have of some of like my other classmates who are also like Pacific Islanders, like going through their majors and everything. Like we always come back to each other and help support each other. Like even though like we have like different majors or fields of like that we're pursuing or so, but we still have that community, and we come back to each other to help one another stay committed and focused in the fields that we're pursuing.
So have you ever been in classes that aren't focused on queer and trans topics, where the professor has done something in particular to make queer and trans students feel seen and included?
I think it's very subtle way. Like I think it's not It's not sort of the sort of subject that he's talking about, but feel seen, heard, and valued for just personal experience and just having that level of emotional depth that we feel accepted in that way. It's like one of my major current chem professor, I think he's very chill in the sense, but very openly emotional too, and that's a sort of sense that makes us feel welcomed. Even though he's not really talking about kind of queer trans values, it's just having that level of openness that we can have and sort of connection with him, that we feel kind of seen and valued for just who we are. And even though we're not open about our own sexual orientations, we're just valued as a person.
So is there anything, in addition to what you just said, that you think faculty can do to make queer and trans students feel respected in the classroom? Anything else?
Just having, I think, would help is having an awareness of the unsafety that we feel. I think in sort of the situations we go through in life or so can help us feel seen, heard, and valued, I think, more in depth from just having that awareness of most of the things that we go through in life and the experiences that we go through.
That makes sense. So what do you think, just in general, it's not about being Pacific Islander or queer, just what motivates you to learn in the classroom?
What learns me in the classroom is that someone once told me, I think, it was another fellow referee, I think, that told me when I explained the sort of isolation and intimidation I feel being in those spaces alone, being the only female Pacific Islander, I think, there. And I think she told me as isolating and intimidating it can feel being in those spaces alone, you make a difference by choosing to continue. And I think that translated, I think, in my own education and pursuit of a career goals in a way, because in a way, I do feel that isolation, intimidation as a Pacific Islander woman and for my own sexual orientation, and to keep pursuing, I think, the career that I want in life. As isolating to me I can feel, I do make a difference from being in those spaces, going through that.
Anything else you want to say about what motivates you to learn in the classroom?
Just having that level of support system and being seen, heard, and valued from that. I think few classmates that are very open, I think, with their own sexualities, as well as having that cultural understandings with my other classmates to keep pursuing, I think, in my academic goals.
So I know you're the vice president.
Oh yeah,
I think QSA. So what do you think, just yourself, and what do you think you've learned from your involvement in the QSA about what the college in general could do to make queer and trans students feel more included, more welcome?
More welcome. Honestly, that's something I think I'm still discussing with our president, Lene Kirby, about the ways we can make them feel seen, heard, valued, and welcomed in those academic spaces. Because I think we're still trying to understand that for ourselves in a way, because we still kind of feel that distance in a way of how we experience these spaces or so, and trying to formulate solutions, I think, to make others feel welcomed in these sort of spaces. Because for us, just in our own little club, the QSA, we try to be more open about our experiences to make them feel safe and valued for who they are. But having to figure out a solution for how the campus can translate that is, I think, a little more complex, in the sense that I think there's still like a lot of complications, I think, that are currently going on that we're still trying to find solutions for.
Is there anything specific that you can think of that's come up in the QSA or in conversations with people in the QSA about issues like problems on campus? And
I think a huge element is safety, especially with the uprising of hate crimes going against LGBTQ members. I think everywhere across, I think, the United States, it's like, especially laws being passed to out, I think, like trans students, queer students, all of the above, we feel this huge unsafety, I think, especially trying to maintain our academic goals, I think, in these spaces when we don't feel safe or protected. It's a huge element and topic that's been going around, I think, within our club, and how we can create like safety for our spaces in this academic field.
Okay, I'm looking at my list of questions, and I definitely have a lot of other questions I could be asking. But for the sake of time, I think I'm going to try and wrap up if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
But is there anything else, just in general, that you would like to add? Questions you'd like to return to?
Honestly, I feel that if I would return to this question, I don't think I'd be ending. I'm just like, okay, I think I'm just going like more in depth into this and that. What's the time limit?
Well, I think we've gone probably, I know it's over 2 hours. So if there's anything you feel like you haven't said that you feel like it's important to say about your experiences on campus, or what do you think is needed to support you, to support other Pacific Islander students, other queer students, other Pacific Islander queer students?
I feel like there's, I don't know, I don't want to out like any queer student, but like I had my suspicions, but I feel like they're too ashamed, especially it comes a long way, I think, to take those steps in accepting yourself when you've been taught your whole life you are not that or someone you are. I think, especially like growing up, like I felt the sort of isolation and intimidation I felt growing up. I think feeling that I didn't have a voice for myself, and always feeling like my voice was held in those around me, as well as how they saw me for many years. It was hard, I think, taking those first few steps, I think accepting myself, because it can truly feel like the whole world's weight on you, taking those first few steps, accepting yourself. Because it was hard for me to go against everything I've been taught, I think, ever since I was little. And I think that was, I think, one of the things that kind of amplified that like self-hatred and suicidal thoughts, because I tried my best to suppress those feelings. Like, that's not true. I can't be going against, I think, what I've been taught that was true to me from what I was taught. So I think, honestly, as painful as this journey continues to be, through this pain I have developed like more love and acceptance for who I truly am. And I hope that shines light on others, I think, questioning like who they are, I think, are trying to find themselves, I think, in a society where there's so much transphobia and homophobia sort of in society, and always being told or questioned for who you are, or always being questioned that you're someone other than who you truly are, which is something that I feel true to, or how I feel, honestly, personally.
All right. Well, thank you for taking all of this time.